I have a 2016 Yamaha R6 here. Guy had it, and something happened with the air filter. The air filter came off or came undone, so ended up pushing a lot of trash into the engine, and he lost compression on one of the cylinders here. I don't know if you can see it. There's a line right there, and you can catch it with your finger. Now I don't know if I'm able to hone that out, or if I'm going to have to replace the top cylinder half, or basically bore this out. But everything else on the motor is good. The cylinder head is not. Cylinder head's not, didn't come with it, but it is the 16. I pulled the oil pan off earlier. Everything looks good underneath there. I'm still going to go ahead and pull the whole thing apart. It's got a brand new clutch in it, which them telling me that it had a brand new clutch put in. Obviously this needs to be pulled apart and cleaned, because usually when a clutch goes bad, it throws all that material into your oil system, because it's all internal to the motor. So it'll throw it into the oil cooler and it'll catch it in there. So last thing I want to do is rebuild this motor and have clutch material now running through my fresh motor and tearing up my motor. But something I want to show you too on these 16 R6s. This is a piston. This is a high compression piston out of a R6S, a 0305 or 06 I believe. So bore comparison, right? Let me take this ring off real quick. Oil control ring. I'm going to take this piston and basically drop it in there. There's a massive amount of difference there. So original bores is 67mm on this R6, and the R6S was a 65mm. I believe it's 65.2 or something like that millimeter piston. And then the R6, the 16, is a 67mm bore, so it's definitely got a larger bore to it compared to the 0305 R6S. But basically the whole purpose of this is pull it all apart, separate the block halves, pull all the rods out, and get a better look at that cylinder, see how far that groove goes down in that bore there, and see how deep it is, and see if it could be fixed with honing. If not, we'll probably have to replace this upper cylinder half. Alright, so that'll do. I'm going to take this piston and rock it. That is quite a bit of rock. Quite a bit. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and pull these guides out. Basically on all R6s, they're held in with pins that go into the side case. So you basically just pull the pins out of both of them. It may be a little rough to get out, because if there's oil behind there, which usually there is, it creates a vacuum and wants to hold it in there, so you just got to work it back and forth. If you've got a pair of pliers, it makes it easier, but then these just slide right out of the motor, and this one too. And a lot of these are replaceable. The plastic piece, not the aluminum piece, but I believe the plastic piece is replaceable, so you can't get that separate. Take our chain, toss our chain in the motor. Try to get our head gasket off now. Alright, so we got the head gasket off. It don't look like anywhere, I ended up causing that, but it don't look like there was any kind of coolant passing through at any point. Both sides of the head gasket looks pretty good. On the R6, I don't know if the R6S is the same way. This is your oil galley here. What a lot of people do is, when it comes to the head gasket, they'll put a reducer in here, or basically clog it up a little bit to basically control more oil pressure to the bottom end of the motor. I don't recommend it, because the top of the head is spinning so quick, you need as much oil as you can up there as far as volume, so I wouldn't recommend restricting that. If you want to increase bottom end pressure, you tighten up your bearing clearances, or you tighten up the pressure relief valve on the motor. Alright, well, I'm going to go ahead and pull this oil pan off this motor real quick. Grab some tooling here. Yeah, the torque on these are not very high, so you gotta worry too much. Alright, so once we get the bottom, this oil pan off, that right there is your oil lever sensor. We don't need that for our application, so I just cut the wire to it. You can leave that in there if you're using a stock pan, and it ain't gonna hurt nothing. If not, you can put a billet, like a mad pan on it, a little bit deeper, more oil capacity on it. But yeah, open the bottom of this motor up. Pickup tube, it's just pressed in, the oil pan holds it in. So we're going to take that, Put it to the side. I'm gonna leave everything. I'm gonna clean everything up as I go through this video, so it's not leaking oil everywhere. Okay, so pickup tube is off. It's just pressed in there to your oil pump. This here is your oil pump. That's your chain that's driven off the clutch basket. This is your oil crossover tube. This is your oil pressure relief valve. There's just an O-ring that holds this in, as well as the pressure on the oil pan. So we'll put that to the side too. This is your oil standpipe. That just basically bolts in through there. You see there's a bolt there. Whoops. There we go, focus. There we go. There's a bolt right there that you need to take off to get that out. So we'll go ahead and pull that out too. Go ahead and pull our crossover tube out. Again, you want to save all these nuts and bolts. If you're not sure where they go, after you take this piece out, just put them back in. Most of this stuff's going to have Loctite on it. And then this is just, after those two bolts are out, just two O-rings. That's your crossover pipe for your oil. Put that to the side. So you got your main inlet for your oil pump, pressurized oil, goes into the motor, runs out of your oil filter, comes back out your regulator. So this regulates your oil pressure, come through your oil system, and then this converts it over into here. So everything gets filtered through the filter before it goes through anywhere else in the engine. Standpipe out, basically it just slides right into the block. The bolt for it is the same bolt that holds the backside of the oil pump down. So you'll have to remove that with the standpipe before you get the oil pump off. So like right now I'm going to go ahead and pull the oil pump. There's a total of 3 bolts for it. Whoops. There's one. There's another one up top here. So I'll pull those 2 out. There's 1, 2. The longest bolt goes to the top. And then your same size bolts here. Same size bolt here will go to the bottom. So the one to the left middle and the bottom right is the small bolts, short bolt, sorry, and the long bolt goes to the top of the oil pump. So now what we should be able to do is pull this up like so, turn this pump a little bit to get it out of the water pump drive. Alright, so after you get your oil pump out, there's your chain there, and that wraps around your clutch basket on the inside of the motor. Here's your oil pump. Okay, take your oil pump, and what I do is, so here's your gear. This oil pump also spins. There's a drive here, a flat drive, almost like a distributor on a 350. Runs through, spins your water pump on the outside of the motor. So there's also 2 dowel pins here that are movable. So you don't lose these. I take a zip tie, run it through, and zip tie it to the oil pump so I don't lose those. Like first off, I'm going to start pulling the water pump off. Okay, so for this I went ahead and already broke it loose because it's hard to do with one hand. But I've got our water pump. It helps when you remove this water pump because the drive is on the inside. Take your hand, push on the inside of this, on the drive, as well as pulling out, and it'll separate from the engine case. And then you can pull the whole water pump out as an assembly. So there's 2 bolts that hold it to the actual block of the motor there. See the 1, 2, 1 here and 1 there. And this is just an O-ring that keeps oil out of there, and that's your water pump for the R6. Oops. Alright, so we got this side cover here. Same thing basically. Pop all your bolts out. This one will be under a little bit of pressure sometimes. If you still have your clutch linkage hooked up, it'll be under a little bit of pressure. Just this lever over here is what releases your clutch, and I'll show you that in a minute. So take all these out. Most of these are interchangeable, so you ain't got to worry too much about where they go. Just make sure they're not too long where they go through and crack the block or a galley. So this is your clutch lever, right? We're going to pull this cover off. So as we pull this cover off, this is locked in here with the clutch. So we're going to take this, and as we pull this out, we're going to rotate this out. What that does is it unlocks the teeth on the shaft for the clutch. Same thing when you go to put it back in. Those teeth rotate in and out So when you go to put it back in, you put it up there, feed that in, and then as you push it in, you go to tighten it up, and that tightens that up, and it brings the whole case cover in. So now we just got to take our clutch apart here, and we'll go from there. On this side, we'll pull off our, ooh, where'd that go? There it is. Pull off our charging system cover. And on this one, there is no bolts in the center. The only one that has a bolt in the center, which I do not have that cover, is going to be... Alright, so we pull our cover off. This is our stator cover. There's our stator, all electronics. There's a gasket here. Here's our flywheel. This is our starter assembly. So we have our starter that comes through the block. This gear spins this gear, which this gear is on bolted all together, which spins a small gear on the back side there. So to remove this, basically just pull this pin out. When you pull this pin out, this whole assembly comes out as one. So, and this, what this does, there's that inner gear, basically just steps it down power wise, and this pin goes through the housing cover, which that supports the starter. So when it spins, it supports it. We can go ahead and leave the starter in. This can stay on because when we split it, this will be the crank. We won't need to touch that. So the only other thing we'll have to do is go ahead and pull this oil cooler off. Alright, so the oil cooler side of this motor on the R6, it has basically a spot where it levels out. When you go to tighten it, it holds it, something the R6S never had. So it's got a spot here where you can tighten it up, it won't move. That's the position of this oil cooler. You're going to have a copper washer on the outside of this bolt, and this is a banjo bolt that goes into the block. So you have oil pressure that comes through here. This oil cooler is made by Denso. I still believe you can pull these apart and clean them. I know in the R6S you can. There's also an O-ring behind here. So I've got a pan here to drain the oil. There's going to be a lot of oil, sometimes coolant. This is a 24 millimeter, and just hit it off and go ahead and let that drain for a bit, and then we'll pull this all the way out and pull that oil cooler off. So there's your copper washer here, and then these holes is what feeds the oil through. So it's got holes in the center and then holes on the outside. So there's your banjo bolt. We'll take this, put this to the side, and then we'll go ahead and pop this off. Actually not too bad, not as much oil as I thought there was. There's your O-ring right there. Sorry, is it an O-ring or square cut? It looks like an O-ring. Yeah, there's your O-ring right there for your oil cooler. So we're going to let that drain out of the motor. Pull this whole assembly off. Again, this is your oil cooler. You have coolant and oil going through there. Oil enters through the center. Coolant runs through the outside of the cooler. So we'll go ahead and let that drain. We're going to put this down for a second. Alright, so we've got our engine this far. If you look at it, there's really not that many parts to these motors. They're not hard motors. There's just a lot to them. There's a lot that goes into them. So we have our chain, our oil pump drive chain. There's guides on both sides. Basically, you want to put that chain on when you put your clutch basket in. As far as pulling this off, we're going to pull all these bolts off all the way out. We're going to pull the 8s, the 14s. They're all labeled. We're going to pull all those out, and we're going to separate this case, this lower pan case, from the upper cylinder half. We're going to leave the crank in there. We're going to leave the clutch basket. We're going to leave all that in there when we do this. We just want the lower half to come off so I can get to the connecting rod, so I can pull the pistons out, really take a look at the inside of the cylinder walls, and go from there as far as diagnosing this thing. I pretty much have a diag on it, but I just want to go through and see what else is worn out. Same thing gives me an opportunity to look at the connecting rod bearings and a couple of the wrist pins on this motor, which I'm kind of suspicious of. take it and rotate it around. And there we go. Alright, so let's take a look at this motor. There's the lower bottom half of the motor. The bearings don't look really bad at all. They look pretty good. They still look pretty much brand new. Let's see. There's your main drive, your crankshaft, and there's a gear that drives your rear gear set, and that's what ends up driving the output shaft of the transmission down here. So when this spins down here, that transfers power through your gear set, whatever you select, out of the motor. Crank journals look good. Actually look really good. Alright, so don't look like we're gonna have any issues with the bottom end on this motor. Everything looks pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and start buzzing these connecting rod caps off. And I'm gonna start with number 1 because that's the cylinder I'd like to look at. That one's the most affected. So we'll start with that one. I'm not going to try to disturb anything else here. Not yet, anyway. Alright, so I got both nuts off. The lower connecting rod. Let's go ahead and pull number 1 off. Check out what it looks like. Not too bad. Definitely would probably put some bearings in here. Yeah, definitely put some bearings in here. Okay. Yeah, not bad. Yeah, definitely will throw a set of bearings in here. Now I'm going to go ahead and knock this connecting rod out of the motor and start inspecting that cylinder. Alright, so we got all the connecting rods and pistons out of the block. Get all the rod ends off. Spins pretty good. Let me see if I can do this without I gotta hold this chain up to spin it with one hand. I mean, it spins pretty good. Definitely gonna need to throw some bearings in there, but if you look at the journals, you can see the oil track when it spins around. You can kind of see how the motor lubricates itself. And I'm just spinning it by the chain here. You're supposed to take the whole clutch basket and everything off when you pull the case cover, but there's ways around it. You just gotta use your noggin. But other than that though, everything else looks good. So we're definitely gonna go ahead and go through this motor, pull everything else apart, order some bearings for it, order a piston. Let's see, this one here. This one here has a big gouge in it, and this piston's just been beat to hell and back with, I'm gonna guess, trash. Either a bit of a guide came out on the head, or there was at one point the engine wasn't ran on. Well, I can't say that because it's only on one cylinder. The rest of them aren't trashed. It's just one cylinder. So number 1, I'm going to say a guide come apart, or something with the valve train came apart and messed up that piston. So we're going to go ahead and pull this crank out of this motor, flip this motor upside down, or at least to the side, and look at the cylinder walls now. Alright, so we got all the connecting rods and pistons out of the block. Get all the rod ends off. Spins pretty good. Let me see if I can do this without I gotta hold this chain up to spin it with one hand. I mean, it spins pretty good. Definitely gonna need to throw some bearings in there, but if you look at the journals, you can see the oil track when it spins around. You can kind of see how the motor lubricates itself. And I'm just spinning it by the chain here. You're supposed to take the whole clutch basket and everything off when you pull the case cover, but there's ways around it. You just gotta use your noggin. But other than that though, everything else looks good. So we're definitely gonna go ahead and go through this motor, pull everything else apart, order some bearings for it, order a piston. Let's see, this one here has a big gouge in it, and this piston's just been beat to hell and back with, I'm gonna guess, trash. Either a bit of a guide came out on the head, or there was at one point the engine wasn't ran on, well, I can't say that because it's only on one cylinder. The rest of them aren't trashed. It's just one cylinder. So number one, I'm going to say a guide come apart, or something with the valve train came apart and messed up that piston. So we're going to go ahead and pull this crank out of this motor, flip this motor upside down, or at least to the side, and look at the cylinder walls now. I'm going to go ahead and pull our gear set at 2 while we have it here. Don't be alarmed if your forks fall down. They're supposed to. So take that, put that to the side. Alright, so only thing we got left is the main drive system. These are forks. Alright, so let's take a look since we got it flipped over. And if you are flipping it over and you have the shift fork still installed, put some underneath there so you're not putting weight on your shift forks. So let's take a look. There's our gouge right there. Right there where the light is. Try not to light it up too much. There we go, now you can see it. There's our gouge there. Not too much of the cross hatching left. This cylinder here looks pretty good. Still got some cross hatching. This one's still good. This one's got some wear. Also got a coating on it too. See if that wipes off. Nope, it don't wipe off. So we got 2 cylinders we have to look at. But we're gonna try to see if we put a hone in there, we can hone that out and see if we can free that up. Something else I want to show you too. And these R6 motors, see them little tiny holes right there? They go underneath the mains. Each cylinder has them, right? Those are your sprayer jets for your bottom of your pistons. They spray oil on the bottom of your pistons. So the oil pressure the motor makes at a certain pressure, it'll spray out on the bottom side of the piston. Keeps the wrist pin cool, the rod and all that cool, which is actually a pretty good design.